There are two kinds of people in the world after 40. Not rich and poor. Not successful and struggling. Not happy and unhappy. There are people who grow things. And there are people who only consume them. And the difference between those two groups, in how long they live, in how clearly they think, in how deeply they sleep, and how quietly they age, is one of the most striking and least talked about patterns in all of modern health research. You already know which group the world wants you in. It wants you on the couch. It wants you scrolling. It wants you buying the next thing, watching the next episode, ordering the next meal, consuming the next piece of content designed by someone else to fill the hours of your one life. It is very good at this. It has spent decades perfecting the art of turning you into an audience, a receiver, a passive body sitting in a chair while the world flows through you and leaves nothing behind. And for a while it works. It is easy. It is comfortable. It asks nothing of you. But something happens after 40. The comfort starts to feel hollow. The couch starts to feel like a trap. The scrolling starts to leave a residue, a vague dissatisfaction that you cannot name and cannot shake. You are full of things you have consumed and somehow still hungry. You are tired in a way that sleep does not fix. You are busy in a way that produces nothing you can hold in your hands. And somewhere underneath all of it, something older than you, older than the screen and the algorithm and the delivery app, is trying to get your attention. It is the part of you that was built to make things grow. For nearly all of human history, the people who survived were the people who grew, who planted and tended and harvested, who got their hands into the soil and pulled food from the ground through patience and care, and the slow intelligence of working with living things. That is what your body was designed for. That is the life your nervous system evolved inside of. The consumer life is 40 years old. The grower life is 40,000. And your body has not forgotten which one it was built for. What researchers have been quietly discovering in studies of aging populations across the world is that the people who continue to grow things after 40, who garden, who tend, who make something live through their own hands and their own care, age in ways that are measurably, strikingly different from those who do not. Not slightly different, strikingly different. They live longer. They think more clearly. They carry less anxiety. They sleep more deeply. They report higher levels of meaning and lower levels of the quiet despair that settles into so many lives in the second half. And the question that nobody is asking loudly enough is why? Why does growing something change the body? Why does putting your hands into soil and tending a living thing alter your brain chemistry, your inflammation levels, your hormonal balance, your relationship with time itself? That is what we are going to look at today. Because the answer is not what most people expect. It is not simply about exercise, though there is that. It is not simply about eating better food, though there is that too. It goes deeper, into the biology of purpose, into the psychology of making something live, into something your grandparents understood without ever reading a study, something that the modern world has quietly stripped away, and that your body is asking you, after 40, to come back to. By the time we are done, you will understand why the most quietly vital people you know all have dirt under their fingernails. And you may never look at a seed the same way again. To understand what growing things does for the body after 40, you first have to understand what not growing anything does to it. And the picture is not pretty. Start with movement, or rather the absence of it. The consumer life is at its core a sedentary life. It is designed that way. Every convenience the modern world has built, the delivery, the streaming, the one-click purchase, the algorithm that knows what you want before you do, is built to eliminate the need for you to move, to do, to make, to go anywhere or lift anything, or spend sustained effort on anything that does not involve a screen. And after 40, a body that does not move begins to change in ways that are slow, quiet, and devastating. The muscle goes first. After 40, the human body loses roughly 1% of its muscle mass every year when that muscle is not actively challenged. 1% sounds small until you do the math. A person who spends their 50s and 60s largely sedentary, consuming rather than creating, can lose 20 to 30% of their functional muscle by the time they reach 70. Not because of age alone, because of stillness. The body reads inactivity as a signal that the muscle is no longer needed, and it begins the quiet process of taking it back. With the muscle goes the strength. With the strength goes the balance. With the balance goes the independence. The trajectory from couch to frailty is not a cliff. It is a slope. Gentle at first, then steeper than anyone expected. But muscle loss is only the beginning. Sit still long enough, day after day, year after year, and the cardiovascular system begins to follow. The heart, which is a muscle like any other, becomes less efficient when it is not regularly asked to work. Blood pressure climbs. Arteries stiffen. The risk of stroke and heart disease, already rising after 40, accelerates in the sedentary body in ways that decades of research have now made impossible to ignore. The consumer life, the life of the couch and the screen, is not a neutral choice. It is a biological cost that the body pays slowly, and then all at once. Then there is the blood. After 40, the body becomes less skilled at managing sugar. Insulin resistance, the precursor to type 2 diabetes, begins its slow climb in bodies that are not regularly moving and regularly making. Every hour of sustained stillness is an hour the body spends managing fuel less efficiently than it was designed to. And the cumulative effect of years of consuming, of eating without moving, of taking in without putting out, compounds in the bloodstream in ways that no supplement and no medication fully reverses. But the part that gets talked about least is what consuming does to the brain. The human brain after 40 is not in decline by nature. It is in decline by neglect. And the consumer life is, neurologically, one of the most neglectful things a person can do to their own mind. Here is why. The brain evolved to solve problems. Real problems. Spatial problems, timing problems, cause and effect problems that played out over days and weeks and seasons. What to plant where. When to harvest. Why the yield was poor this year, and what to do differently next. The brain that spent 40,000 years growing things was a brain in constant, active, meaningful engagement with the real world. The brain that spends its afternoons watching other people live their lives on a screen is not engaged. It is stimulated. And stimulation is not the same as engagement. Stimulation lights up the reward centers and leaves the problem-solving centers dark. It gives the feeling of activity without the substance of it. And over years, the brain that is stimulated but not genuinely challenged begins to lose the very capacities it was built to use. Memory softens. Concentration shortens. The ability to sustain attention on anything slow and real and unfolding over time, which is exactly what a garden demands, begins to erode. Studies following aging populations over decades have found consistent patterns. The people who remain mentally sharp into their 70s and 80s are almost universally people who continued to do real things with their hands and their minds. Who built, tended, created, solved. Who stayed in active relationship with the physical world, rather than retreating into passive consumption of a digital one. And then there is something harder to measure, but impossible to ignore once you have seen it. The feeling. You know the feeling. You have had it after a long day of nothing. After hours of scrolling that left you tired but not rested, full but not satisfied, entertained but somehow emptier than before. It is a specific kind of hollowness that the consumer life produces in people past 40, a sense that the hours went somewhere but you cannot find them, that you were present but not really there, that something is missing and you cannot name it. That feeling is not weakness. It is not laziness. It is not a character flaw. It is biological feedback. It is your body and your brain telling you, in the only language they have, that they were built for something other than this. That the life of pure consumption, however comfortable, however convenient, however expertly designed to keep you coming back, is not the life your nervous system evolved inside of. It is the signal that something older and deeper in you is still waiting, still available, still capable of the thing it was built for. All it needs is a seed, a patch of ground, and the decision to stop consuming long enough to start growing. Because what happens next, what the body and the brain do when you put your hands into soil and take responsibility for something living, is one of the most quietly extraordinary things in all of human biology. And that is exactly where we are going. There is a moment that happens to almost everyone who starts a garden for the first time. It is not the moment the seed goes into the ground. It is not the first watering, or the careful reading of the packet, or the optimistic arranging of the pots on the windowsill. It is the morning, maybe 10 days later, maybe 2 weeks, when you walk out and there it is. A thread of green, almost impossibly thin, pushing up through the soil where there was nothing before. Something that did not exist is now alive. And you did that. Your hands, your decision, your small daily act of showing up with water and attention made that possible. Most people are not prepared for what they feel in that moment. It is not pride exactly, though there is some of that. It is something older and quieter. Something that feels less like an achievement and more like a recognition. Like a part of you that had been waiting a very long time has finally been given something it needed. That feeling is not sentimental. It is biological. And understanding what is actually happening in your body in that moment is the key to understanding why growing things does what no medicine can replicate. Start with the hands. When the hands engage with soil, with real living earth and not a touchscreen or a steering wheel or a keyboard, something changes in the nervous system almost immediately. The skin of the human hand contains an extraordinary density of sensory receptors, more than almost any other part of the body. Those receptors evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in direct contact with the natural world, with bark and stone and soil and water and living things. When they make that contact again, they send signals up through the nervous system that have a measurable calming effect on the brain. Not metaphorically calming, physiologically calming. Heart rate slows, cortisol drops. The nervous system shifts from the sympathetic state, the braced, alert, fight-or-flight readiness that the modern world keeps most people locked in, toward the parasympathetic state, the rest and digest mode. The mode in which the body heals, consolidates memory, regulates inflammation, and does the deep maintenance work that it cannot do when it is constantly braced for threat. The garden, simply by being what it is, tells your nervous system that you are safe. And a nervous system that believes it is safe begins to do things that a braced nervous system cannot. Then there is the soil itself. Healthy garden soil is not inert. It is one of the most biologically complex ecosystems on Earth, containing billions of microorganisms per handful, fungi, bacteria, protozoa, organisms whose relationships with each other and with the roots of plants are still only partially understood by science. Among those organisms is a bacterium called Mycobacterium vaccae, which has received significant attention in recent years for something remarkable it does when it enters the human body through the skin and the respiratory system. It triggers the production of serotonin, the same neurotransmitter that antidepressants attempt to regulate through chemistry. The soil has been producing naturally in the bodies of people who work the earth for as long as people have worked the earth. Researchers studying Mycobacterium vaccae have found that it also reduces anxiety, improves cognitive function, and has anti-inflammatory effects that extend well beyond the brain. Some scientists studying it have begun calling it a natural antidepressant. Others have gone further, suggesting that the modern epidemic of anxiety and depression in industrialized countries may be partly explained by our disconnection from the very microbiome our nervous systems co-evolved with. We were not built to live apart from soil, and our bodies after 40 are increasingly clear about that fact. But the chemistry of the soil is only one part of what growing things does that medicine cannot replicate. There is also the question of purpose. The human brain is a purpose-seeking organ. It does not function well in the absence of meaningful goals that play out over time. And this is precisely where the consumer life fails the aging brain most completely. Consumption offers stimulation, novelty, the short-term satisfaction of wanting and receiving. But it offers no arc, no project that unfolds over weeks, no investment in something living that requires your continued presence and care to survive. The garden offers all of that. When you plant something, you create an obligation that is also a gift. Something living is now depending on you to show up. Not dramatically, not urgently, but faithfully and repeatedly over days and weeks and months. And the brain, deprived of this kind of sustained, meaningful engagement, responds to it the way a thirsty person responds to water. With relief, with activation, with the quiet but unmistakable sense that something important is happening here, something worth paying attention to. This sustained engagement does measurable things to the brain over time. It increases the production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is sometimes called fertilizer for the brain. BDNF promotes the growth of new neural connections, protects existing ones, and is strongly associated with resistance to cognitive decline. Physical activity produces it. Learning produces it. And growing things, which combines physical activity with ongoing learning and problem-solving, produces it in ways that passive consumption simply does not. The studies on this are becoming harder to ignore. Long-term research following thousands of people into old age has found that those who garden regularly have significantly lower rates of dementia than those who do not. One large Australian study found the risk reduction to be as high as 36%. Not from a drug, not from a supplement, from the sustained, purposeful act of making something live. And there is one more thing that growing does that medicine cannot give you, and it may be the most important of all. It gives you something to look forward to tomorrow. Not the next episode, not the next delivery, not the next notification. A living thing that will be different tomorrow than it is today. A process that is unfolding on its own schedule, in its own time, asking only that you show up and pay attention. In a life that has quietly lost its sense of forward motion, the garden restores it. Not dramatically, not all at once, but one morning at a time, one thin green thread pushing through the soil at a time. Until one day you realize that you are not just growing plants. You are growing back something in yourself that the consumer life had quietly taken away. And the most remarkable thing about all of this is that none of it is new. None of it needed a study to prove it. The people who came before us understood it without a single piece of research. Which is exactly what we need to look at next. There is a photograph that exists in almost every family. You may have one somewhere. In a drawer or a box in the attic, or on the wall of someone older than you who kept these things. A photograph of a grandparent or a great-grandparent standing in a garden. Not posing exactly. Just standing there, squinting slightly into the sun, with the garden behind them or beside them or surrounding them on all sides. Beans on poles. Tomatoes on stakes. Rows of something green disappearing into the background. They are not smiling for the camera the way people smile now. They are just there, present in a way that is hard to describe but immediately recognizable. Rooted in a way that has nothing to do with the soil behind them and everything to do with who they were. You look at that photograph and something moves in you. Not nostalgia exactly. something older than nostalgia, a recognition, a sense that you are looking at something true about human life that you have almost but not quite forgotten. That feeling is worth paying attention to. Because what your grandparents had, what the people in those photographs understood without ever articulating it, was not just a practical skill or a cultural habit. It was a relationship with time and with living things that shaped them at a level most of us have lost access to. They grew up understanding, in their bodies and not just their heads, that life moves slowly, that nothing worth having arrives immediately, that the most important things, food, family, trust, a good harvest, a life well lived, are built through sustained attention over long periods of time. Not purchased, not downloaded, not optimized, grown. And that understanding was not just philosophical. It was neurological. It was written into how their nervous systems worked, how their brains processed time, how their bodies related to effort and patience, and the slow unfolding of things they had no power to rush. Your grandparents were not more virtuous than you. They were not more disciplined or more patient by nature. They were shaped by a different relationship with time. A relationship the garden enforced, quietly and daily, whether they thought about it or not. Consider what it meant to grow your own food in the era those photographs were taken. It meant that the things you needed most in the world, the food that kept you alive, could not be obtained instantly, could not be delivered, could not be accessed by opening an app. They had to be planted in spring and tended through summer and harvested in autumn. And if you wanted them next year, you had to save the seeds and start again. The entire structure of daily life was built around a timeline that nothing could accelerate. You worked with the seasons or you went without. That is not deprivation. That is education. It is an education in the nature of real things, in the fact that living things have their own timeline and do not negotiate, in the fact that your job is not to force or rush or optimize, but to tend and wait and pay attention, in the fact that the most important variable in any garden is not the soil or the seeds or the weather, but the quality of your sustained presence over time. Your grandparents learned this the way all true things are learned. Not from a book, from doing it season after season, until it became the shape of how they moved through the world. And what we have lost, in the 2 or 3 generations since that photograph was taken, is not just the practical knowledge of how to grow food. We have lost the neurological formation that came with it, the particular way of relating to time that a garden enforces, the tolerance for slowness, the comfort with process, the ability to invest in something whose return is weeks or months away, and to find meaning in the tending itself, not only in the harvest. We have been replaced, as a culture, by people who expect immediate results, who feel anxiety when something takes longer than expected, who struggle to sustain attention on anything that does not deliver feedback in seconds, who, after 40, often find themselves in the strange position of having everything they were told to want and feeling somehow cheated, somehow behind, somehow as though the life they are living is not quite the life they were supposed to have. That is not a character flaw. It is a withdrawal symptom. The modern world sold us a particular relationship with time, fast, immediate, frictionless, and our nervous systems are paying the price. The garden is the antidote. Not because it teaches you lessons about patience, though it does, but because it forces a relationship with time that rewires the nervous system from the inside. When you plant a seed, you cannot make it grow faster by wanting it to. When you tend a plant through weeks of rain and cold, you cannot skip ahead to the warm days. When you wait for the first fruit of the season, you cannot download it or subscribe to it or receive it earlier by paying more. You simply have to be with it, present to it, trusting a process that is older and wiser than any system human beings have built to bypass it. And something happens in that waiting. Something that the people in those old photographs had in abundance, and that most of us are desperately short of. a sense that time is not the enemy, that slow is not the same as wrong, that the days spent tending something that has not yet arrived are not wasted days, that there is a kind of richness in the process itself, in the showing up and the paying attention and the small daily acts of care, that the instant world cannot give you and cannot take away once you have found it. This is what your grandparents knew, not as a philosophy, as a fact of life, repeated every season, confirmed every harvest, passed down not through words but through the sight of weathered hands in the soil and the smell of something growing in the early morning air. It is still available to you. The garden has not changed. The soil has not forgotten. The seeds do not know that the world got faster. They are still willing to teach you everything your grandparents knew, if you are willing to go slowly enough to learn it. And the beautiful thing, the thing that surprises almost everyone who comes back to growing after years away from it, is that you do not have to know anything to begin. Which is exactly what we need to talk about next. Most people who have never grown anything believe the same lie. They believe that gardening is a skill, that it belongs to people who were taught it young, who have a natural gift for it, who know the names of things and the timing of things and the particular language of soil and seed that sounds, from the outside, like a foreign tongue. They believe that to begin, you must already know something. And because they do not know anything, they do not begin. This is the lie that costs more years than almost any other. Because the truth that every experienced gardener will tell you if you ask them honestly, is that they started exactly where you are. With nothing, with a packet of seeds and a patch of ground, and a complete absence of certainty about what they were doing. With failures that taught them more than any success. With plants that died and soil that disappointed and seasons that humbled them completely. And they came back anyway. Not because they were gifted. Because the garden kept giving them something they needed, even when it was failing them. Especially when it was failing them. You do not need to know anything to begin. You only need to begin. But there is something worth understanding before you do. Something that will save you from the mistake that stops most beginners before they ever really start. The mistake is trying to do too much at once. The beginning gardener, full of enthusiasm and a newly purchased collection of seeds, plants everything in the first week of spring and then watches, with growing confusion and eventual despair, as most of it fails to thrive. The tomatoes go in too early. The beans get planted too deep. The herbs that need sun end up in shade. The whole project collapses into a tangle of what went wrong and why, and the conclusion drawn is always the same. I am not good at this. This is not for me. But the conclusion is wrong. What happened was not failure. It was education. And the only actual mistake was trying to learn everything at once instead of starting with one thing and learning it completely. So here is where to start. One thing. The simplest, most forgiving, most immediately rewarding thing you can grow in the ground or in a pot on a balcony or in a window box on a city sill. Herbs. Specifically, basil if you have warmth and sun. Mint if you have shade and moisture. Chives if you have almost nothing and want something that grows with almost no help at all. These plants are forgiving of beginner mistakes. They grow quickly enough to give you the feedback your brain needs to stay engaged. They are useful in a way you can experience immediately, in your kitchen, in your food, in the daily small pleasure of cutting something you grew yourself and putting it into a meal. And they teach you the first and most important lesson of the garden, without ever needing to be explained. They teach you that living things respond to attention. Not to perfection. Not to expertise. To attention. To the daily act of looking and noticing and responding to what you see. Is the soil dry? Is the light enough? Are the leaves telling you something with their color or their posture or the particular way they are reaching toward or away from the window? The plant is always communicating. Your only job at the beginning is to learn to listen. This is a skill that transfers. Every plant you grow after the first one will be easier than the first, not because you memorized more facts, but because you developed a way of paying attention to living things that becomes more refined with every season. Experienced gardeners are not people who know more. They are people who have learned to notice more. And noticing is something any person, at any age, in any season of life, can begin to practice tomorrow. Once the herbs are alive and you have kept them alive for a few weeks, which you will, because you will pay attention to them the way you pay attention to things that matter, you add one more thing. Not five more things. 1. A tomato plant, if you have outdoor space in summer warmth. A courgette, which grows with almost aggressive enthusiasm and will reward almost any level of care with more fruit than you expected. A single row of salad leaves in a long pot on a terrace, which can be cut and will grow back, cut and grow back for months. One thing. Tended well. Observed carefully. Allowed to teach you what it has to teach. This is not a slow way to become a gardener. It is the only way to become a gardener. The people who try to do everything at once learn nothing and grow nothing. The people who start with one thing and give it their full attention build, season by season, a relationship with growing that deepens in ways they did not anticipate and cannot fully explain. And here is what happens along the way that nobody tells you to expect. You start to change. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But in the way that sustained contact with living things changes people who let it. You start to notice the light differently. The quality of morning versus afternoon, the way the sun moves through the season, the particular slant of late summer that tells you something is ending and something else is about to begin. You start to notice the soil. Whether it is wet or dry, loose or compacted, alive with the small movements of things living in it or dull and lifeless in a way that tells you it needs help. You start to move more slowly. Not because you are tired, but because slowness becomes appropriate. Because the thing in front of you rewards slowness and punishes rushing. Because you are learning, for perhaps the first time in a long time, to be somewhere fully instead of passing through it on the way to somewhere else. You start to look forward to tomorrow in a specific way. Not the vague looking forward of someone waiting for the weekend or the holiday, but the concrete anticipation of someone who has something growing that will be different tomorrow than it is today. Something small and alive, and depending on you to come back. That is not a small thing. After 40, that is not a small thing at all. Because what the garden gives the beginner, underneath the herbs and the tomatoes, and the slowly accumulating knowledge of what grows where and when, is something that the modern world has been quietly taking away for decades. It gives you back the feeling that you are not just passing through your own life, that you are building something in it, tending something in it, that the days are not just being consumed, but are being used for something that grows, slowly and surely, into more than you could see at the beginning. And that feeling, once you have it, is very hard to give up. Which is why the people who start rarely stop. And why the people who never start are the ones who, somewhere past 60, find themselves wondering where the years went, and why the hands that could have been in the soil were never given the chance. It is not too late. It was never too late. The seed does not know how long it has been waiting. It only knows that the ground is ready and someone has finally shown up. That someone can be you. Starting tomorrow. Starting with one small thing in a pot on a windowsill. And from there, everything else follows. Come back to the beginning with me for a moment. Two kinds of people. That is where we started. Not rich and poor. Not lucky and unlucky. Not the ones who figured it out and the ones who did not. People who grow things. And people who only consume them. By now you understand that this is not a moral distinction. It is not about virtue or discipline, or being the kind of person who rises at 5 in the morning and has everything figured out. It is about something much simpler and much more fundamental than that. It is about what the human body was built for, what the human brain evolved inside of, what the human nervous system recognizes, at a level below thought and below language, as home. You were not built for the couch. You were not built for the scroll. You were not built for the life of pure consumption, however comfortable, however convenient, however expertly engineered to feel like enough. You were built for the garden, for the soil, for the slow, purposeful, deeply satisfying work of making something live through your own hands and your own attention and your own daily act of showing up. And your body has been trying to tell you this for years, in the hollow feeling after a long day of consuming nothing real, in the tiredness that sleep does not fix, in the vague dissatisfaction that follows you through evenings that were full of things but empty of anything you made, in the way you feel when you hold something you grew yourself, even something small, even a single herb in a pot on a windowsill, and something in you goes quiet in a way it almost never does. That quiet is recognition. That is your nervous system remembering what it was built for. Think about what you know now that you did not know when we began. You know that the sedentary consumer life is not neutral, that it costs the body muscle and heart and metabolic function in ways that compound silently over years, that the brain deprived of real engagement, of problems that unfold slowly over time, of sustained contact with living things, softens in ways that no amount of stimulation reverses. You know that the soil itself is medicine, that the microorganisms in healthy earth enter your body and lift your mood in ways that pharmaceutical companies have spent billions trying to replicate and cannot, that the act of putting your hands into the ground triggers a parasympathetic response in your nervous system that the modern world almost never allows. You know that growing something gives the brain what it was built for. The arc, the purpose, the sustained investment in something alive that rewards your presence and responds to your care. You know that people who grow things carry less anxiety, sleep more deeply, think more clearly, and live longer than people who do not, and that this is not a coincidence or a correlation, but a reflection of something deep and biological about what human beings are for. You know what your grandparents understood without ever reading a study. That time moves slowly when you are tending something living. That slow is not wrong. That the days spent waiting for something to grow are not wasted days but full ones, if you are paying attention to what is happening in them. And you know that you do not need to know anything to begin. That the garden is patient with beginners. That it has always been patient with beginners. That the only thing it asks of you is that you show up, pay attention, and trust a process that is older and wiser than anything the modern world has built to replace it. So what do you do with all of this? You go outside, or you find a pot and a windowsill and a small packet of seeds that costs almost nothing. You put your hands into soil, real soil, and you plant something. You water it. You come back tomorrow and you look at it. You pay attention to it, the way you pay attention to things that matter to you. And then you do it again the next day. And the day after that. That is all. That is the whole prescription. That is the thing the studies point to, and the thing the grandparents knew, and the thing your body has been asking you for, in its quiet, persistent way, for longer than you have been listening. The people who live longest are not the ones who found the right supplement or the right diet or the right morning routine. They are, with striking consistency across cultures and across decades of research, the people who stayed in active relationship with living things, who grew something, who tended something, who had dirty hands and a reason to go outside tomorrow. That can be you. Starting now. Starting small. Starting with one seed in one pot on one windowsill and the decision to pay attention to it. Because here is the thing about growing something that nobody tells you until you have done it. It grows you back. The patience you give to the plant comes back to you as steadiness. The attention you bring to the soil comes back to you as presence. The hope you invest in a seed that has not yet sprouted comes back to you, on the morning it finally does, as something that feels very close to joy. And joy, real joy, the quiet, unspectacular kind that comes from making something live with your own hands, is one of the most protective things a human being can carry into the second half of their life. You are built to grow things. The soil is still there. The seeds are still willing. The seasons are still turning in the same direction they always have. All that is left is for you to begin. If something in what you heard today stayed with you, tell me in the comments. Are you already growing something, or is this the moment you decide to start? I read every one. And if you want more stories like this one, stories about the quiet things that matter most in the second half of life, stay a while. There is a whole garden waiting.